Welcome to the Sports Entrepreneurs Podcast. I'm your host, Marcus Luer, and yes, today I will be the guest as well. I have decided to share some of my stories of my 25 years in this amazing industry, how I got in it, and what I've learned as a business owner and entrepreneur, things which worked, and of course, the many things which didn't work. Similar to these amazing guests I've had over the last 6, 7, 8 months now, on the podcast, there's tons of stories, and I'd love to share some of it with you. So here we go. We always started off with a bit about how people get into the industry. Well, here's my short, longer version of that. I was always into sports. I was playing tennis when I was very young, so tennis was my thing, and I was ended up being a ball boy at a professional tennis tournament in Cologne when I was very young. And so one of the vivid memories I had being part of when Boris Becker had his first professional tournament before he won Wimbledon, playing at the tournament. And so I stayed around that tournament until I was about 18, 19, grew up and did a bit of management work there and really got a good sense of, how a tournament was run on the back of it. Still at that time had absolutely no idea that this would ever become a potential profession. Fast forward, ended up in the United States, studying there in Texas, TCU, so I'm a Horned Frog. And luckily, I was in Fort Worth, and at that time, the United States was awarded the FIFA World Cup in 1994. So this was several years prior to that while I was studying. So I volunteered, ended up hanging around the offices there, and every time someone on FIFA showed up, they called the German kit because a lot of the FIFA officials, of course, were German speakers, and I was there to help them out. So on the back of it, just had an opportunity to get to know a lot of interesting people and made relationships. So big, hint for anyone in this who is studying right now or wants to come into this industry, just find places to go and connect with the industry, and none of these maybe are paying jobs at the beginning, but it gets you in there. And this was a perfect example in my case as well. My first real experience really was with American Airlines, where I had an incredible summer internship where I got myself in there to help them build their World Cup campaign, again, for 1994. That was so much fun because I was the only person in the entire office there who had a clue about football, being German. All my American colleagues really, didn't care much about it. So they put me in charge of just about everything as an MBA student. I guess they figured, I might be able to figure this out. So one of my, again, vivid memories was being in Mexico City at the Azteca Stadium, sitting next to, at that time, FIFA President Joe Havelange as the American Airlines representative. I think I was 24, 25 or something, and hosting him because American Airlines was the title sponsor of the event there. So incredible atmosphere, 120,000 fans in the stadium. Mexico beat the U.S. 4-0, and we ended up going on the pitch and handing over the trophy. I think that was the first time I realized that this is something I'd love to do for a living. Having that atmosphere, being part of something at that level was just incredible. So again, a couple of years later then I graduated in 94, and right after that, luckily the World Cup kicked off in the US, and I ended up a job with ISL Marketing. That was, again, unbelievable experience, spending 1 month as the venue manager in Dallas, coordinating things on the ground, etc. And then I ended up with my real first job, in a sense, was in Hong Kong, with a company at that time was called the Asia Sport Group. Later on became the World Sport Group, and later on was sold to Lagardère, and now it's Lagardère Sports or Lagardère Asia. So lots of old colleagues there, but I was in that. I spent about 3 years in the company there, helping to set up the Asian Basketball Confederation marketing program, and then eventually ended up working with the team who created the Asian PGA Golf Tour. So we had this crazy idea to launch a full-blown golf tour in Asia, and we did overnight. It was, I think, 1996, where we launched the tour with 20 events. At that time, I had already moved to Malaysia to be next to the federation and hold their hand and again, guide the process. So again, fast forward a little bit there to the later part of 1997 when I decided and I would say this at that time, at my youthful ignorance or arrogance, I was 29, that I could do this myself. So I jumped out, started my own company, And of course, lo and behold, what happens the next thing? We have this Asian financial crisis. Anyone in Asia would remember that at a time it was as devastating as to some degree what we're seeing right now, or at least what the world saw in 2008 and 9. Currencies just went crazy. And so, of course, having this great business idea went pretty much straight out of the window, and we had to retool very heavily. When I said we, it was me and one other guy. So that was the beginning of TSA. It's now 23 years ago, and luckily, the good start to the story is that we're still around, and we've been reincarnated on several occasions. So I call this right now, we would be at TSA 5.0. And maybe over the next, sort of 20 minutes, I'll talk you through what were the 1.0, 2.0, etc. versions here. Because 23 years, it's a long journey for anyone. Being in, building your own company, seeing the ups and downs, as you can only imagine. And some of it were things which were brought in from the outside, whether it's the global crisis in 2008-09, and of course what we're seeing now here with COVID, and others were internally created scenarios where we just made a bunch of mistakes and had to pay a price for that. So let's get a bit into that side of the story. Now, so TSA 1.0, many people have heard me say that we were the WWE agency. Very quickly after our first year, when we got off the blocks, we were managed to get a great contract to represent the World Wrestling Federation at that time, which then later on became World Wrestling Entertainment here in Asia. It was, again, one of these great stories where one of my staff was a big fan of it. I have to admit, when I was studying in the US, I would probably had watched 5 minutes of it. I just couldn't quite get my head around the product at all. But he was a big fan, and he convinced me that we should do something with it. There was an appetite in Malaysia specifically, and we did. So we ended up buying the product or placing it for a sponsor on a broadcaster here in Malaysia for not a lot of money. And lo and behold, it became the #1 rated TV program overnight. It's just massively successful, very, very popular. And WWE got wind of it and came to us and said, "Hey, Marcus, what you guys did here there in Malaysia, that's kind of cool. Can you do this sort of in some of the other countries here in Asia?" And again, without going into too much detail of that side of the story, we did. And we became very successful to take a very American product and, let's use the word, Asianize it, make it locally relevant. And we created all sort of really interesting ways of talking to our customer, which of course were broadcasters at that time. And that wasn't trying to convince them how great this was in the United States and how big ratings they had, but just making it very locally relevant for him. And I'll give you one simple example. Most of the buyers were, of course, slightly older gentlemen or sometimes ladies. And they just, again, WWE wasn't their thing. But most of them had children. And a lot of those children loved WWE. So what do? We would give them T-shirts and caps and all sort of stuff, and just say, "Look, why don't you just take this home, and maybe someone there might enjoy it." And I can tell you several stories where people literally within a week or sometimes days would call us back and say, "Marcus, you know what, this WWE thing, let's have another conversation, because my son just thinks this would be the coolest thing ever if I'm, as his dad, would put this on air." So, again, keep listening to my little stories and tricks here. This isn't just stories. This is, there are underlying elements in there of how we've built the company and we've helped brands operate, right? So this became a huge story. And again, without going into all the nitty-gritty side of it, but within a span of 8 years, we generated $170 million for WWE. So in our, less than, let's say, 10 years, the first sort of 1.0 version, being the WWE agency, we always saw growth. We grew like crazy. Our own revenue went from, a few $100,000 into tens of millions of dollars. We made a lot of money. WWE made even more money. And we became a very, very successful agency here with offices across the region. At a peak, we were close to 100 people. With 7 offices, everything from Japan, 3 offices in India, China, Thailand. We even went to Dubai at one point in time, and we're forgetting anything here. Of course, Malaysia, where is our head office, Singapore, etc. So we had a large presence, large overheads, and that was later when we talk a bit more some of the learnings here. That was probably one of the big mistakes already I made, is that as usual, when we went too quick, too fast. We just kept we were making lots of money, and we just kept putting that money, of course, to use to get bigger and grow faster. And I do remember my good friend Donald Dell, who I've interviewed as well, always telling me, Marcus, watch your overheads. Your overheads are going to kill you. Well, guess I was young and stupid, and I didn't quite listen to that. And later on, we definitely found out that the gentleman was right. So another lesson to be learned there. Now, 1.0 version, really, I always say we worked ourselves out of a job. We made WWE so much money as well, of course. We were making good money as an agency because we were getting paid a good commission. Someone there decided, it's time to take this in-house, which they did. And on the back of it, started their own offices here in the WWE office in the region. And we were out of a job in a sense. Well, luckily, we were not only selling WWE at that time, we were selling lots of other television rights as well. And so we were able to soften the blow and repivot the company in other directions. And 2.0 version, which probably started around 2008 and 2009, we were a very heavily media-driven agency. We ended up winning several large contracts with Racket Sports. We represented the US Open Tennis, the Badminton World Federation, BWF, ITTF, International Table Tennis Federation, International Squash Federation, etc. So, we really had a very strong badminton portfolio, which wasn't just in Asia anymore. We now really, truly were selling globally. We took, what maybe people would consider Asian sports, Asian racket sports, badminton, table tennis. We took it globally, knowing, of course, that the larger audience was here, so the bigger contracts maybe came out of Asia, but we were selling globally. That was, again, great period. A lot of interesting things we were doing there. As usual, not everything worked, of course, but overall we were running quite well. In between, of course, you had 2008 and 2009 crisis, which crushed the world from an advertising point of view. So all the ad dollars were disappearing. That was the first time ever after 10 years of solid growth and making money every single day. In 8 or 9, we did see a dip. And this came from because we had large overheads and revenues all of a sudden disappeared on us, which, many other people had the same. So, we had a painful 2 years there. Had to retool the company quite a bit, but luckily we were sitting quite a bit of money because we had brought a private equity group into the firm at that time, and so we weathered the storm and we came out flying. I remember 2010, 11, and 12 we hit absolute new highs. At a peak, we were doing about $50 million of gross revenue in 2012. And that was again an incredible learning how we were able to swing out of this full guns blazing after this major crisis, which is sort of something I'm hoping will happen once we get through this crisis, that there will be again this sort of incredible, exciting uptake there. Now then came 3.0. In the year 2000, sort of 13, 14, we were. We created a crisis internally. It started with our office in India, which imploded. We had made wrong decisions in the media business. We had bought content we couldn't sell, and we were just writing large checks with rights holders where we didn't sell a thing. So it's literally taking $1 million and putting it up in flames. You didn't sell anything, and the product was evaporating, of course, because it was all live content. So we got our fingers burned quite a bit, and a lot of it was again very self-inflicted across several platforms. It was also an exciting time because we had just launched Glory Kickboxing. We were one of the founders of Glory in 2012. I was running the company for the first year, so again, probably stretched too far, and that's a big learning again. When you take on too much, you lose focus, and clearly that's what happened. The company, even though we had a great 2012, on the back of it, just the year or two after, really disintegrated quite a bit because I guess I took the eye off the ball there. So Glory was kicking off. We had pumped, a considerable amount of money into it as well to get it up and running. And now we have this, multiple fires across the whole company. So I had no choice, come back in and start a cleaning act. And that part of it was just shrinking the company healthy. There was no other way around it. We had to build things and change stuff around. So at that time already, we started to get it much more into other revenue streams, some sponsorship. licensing deals. We created what we call branded real estate at that time, which is almost the reversal of a naming rights, where instead of the brand paying to be on a major building, we connected real estate companies with global recognized brands, super brands like Armani, or at the beginning it was actually sports brands, and then leverage that brand and the co-branding, the power of it, to create these amazing real estate projects. So that became a very lucrative part. We have a whole sort of arm of the company for that now. We call it brandedrealestate.com, if you'd like to check it out. And on the back of it, again, the company, was starting to recover. We were, doing well again in different spaces. We created this amazing Axiata Arena here in Malaysia by being a consultant to the government and to a place which we now renamed into the KL Sports City. So the whole consulting business again was taking off and creating a whole range of new opportunities, working with governments and helping them how to leverage sports. And that, I think, is an interesting theme for my entire 23 years here in Asia, as I guess one of the sort of founding fathers of the industry, is that what we're doing now and what we maybe did 23 years ago, of course, is very different. There's always certain core elements of it. Yes, we still sell television rights. We still do certain things we did over the 20 years. But at the same time, I think we never stood still. We've always reinvented us. And that's why I keep talking about these 3.0, 1.0, 4.0 versions here, because that helps me in my own mind to create differentiations between the different things we've done as a company over the years. So to kind of wrap up a bit where we are, so 3.0 was all about, as I said, sponsorship and licensing deals and a lot of very, very interesting things. Again, very much out of the box thinking, I would argue. 4.0, which started probably around the year 2017, we were then getting very much into the digital space. I was convinced that OTT was the future of content delivery. I'm still convinced of that, although I've learned a couple of painful lessons in the process. That's not quite as easy as it sounds like. So we created a platform called SportsFix. SportsFix was the first OTT platform here in Southeast Asia, catering to a particular niche audience with the content. We didn't have the big budgets to go after major rights, so we started very niche, building a good platform around it, raised a bunch of money, and we were up and running. We had a very, very exciting team of young guys there working hard on it, and everything at the beginning looked great. As I said, it was an extremely exciting time. TSA as a group pumped a lot of money into it as well, a lot of resources, of course. My time and other people's time was put into this. So the shorter and long story of that is that eventually we couldn't sustain it. The industry wasn't quite ready for it, or maybe the consumer and the structures weren't quite there yet. Charging customers for the content or bringing advertisers in took a lot longer than we had anticipated. And the short of long of it is, we ran out of money and had, unfortunately, to stop the business and basically put it on hold. So in the process, of course, a lot of pain was created internally and externally, and we still, to some degree, are cleaning things up there. I will maybe find another time to talk about that separately, because it was an incredible learning experience on both ends. At that time, we were looking at blockchain technology in 2018. When blockchain became the big thing, we actually created an ICO, an initial coin offering. We created an incredible white paper. We spent probably 6 months putting it together. I would say it was as good as any white paper I've seen out there, especially in sports. But unfortunately, it took us too long. By the time we finally were up and running, it was in the middle of 2018. And at that time, sort of the whole Bitcoin and the blockchain or ICO craze had dropped. We couldn't raise any money anymore, unfortunately. And we had to abandon it. All the experts were telling us that we would be able to raise easily $20 or $30 million on the back of our white paper. And of course, we thought that would be an amazing way to bring new money into this and sustain the business. And that was really what's so interesting, typical digital startup. We were in conversations at one point in time with investors where after 18 months the business was valued at 25 million US dollars and no one was blinking. Neither were we. We actually thought it should be more, but that again was an interesting learning. And when you look at what happens to companies like WeWorks and others, these numbers are somewhat arbitrary, and it's always, of course, somewhat the valuation of whatever the last guy, the money he put in. And so great learning there. Not all fun, but lots and lots of learnings coming out of it. And one part, the more we were getting into digital, was clearly that esports is a space we should be looking at more, which we started to do, and we are in there much more now as well. Why is, again, to me, very, very easy to see. There's a lot of similarities. There is, there are players, there are athletes, there are teams, there are platform owners, which, in some ways is no different than a federation in sports, and many other things which we do best, which we know how to generate revenue streams for IP owners, and therefore that's where we're now in it. So we created a separate division called Total Esports, and it's very much focused on working with some of those amazing platform and teams out there, and especially now in this time here, of course, that's an area which is helping us. So again, an interesting pivot in the process. So where are we now? And until about last year, I was very happy with the 4.0 version we were in. We were making progress. We had started a football division as well. We were looking at football trading players here in Asia. And again, just looking at where the industry was heading and where should we be as a company. Now here comes the virus, and obviously everything gets thrown up in the air. No one knows anymore where this is heading. We still don't have quite seen the end of it, and how sports will come back in what form or shape. I'm in conference calls, and I'm sit on several advisory as an advisory on several boards and others, and I see everything in from excitement to, of course, complete despair. So what does it mean for us as a company, as TSA? I would argue really simply, we are now, or we're starting now, I would say, the 5.0 version, post-COVID version. And for us, there is a couple of key elements. Number one, it's our consulting business, which is running well. We're consulting to several groups here in Asia, governments. We're helping them to build a master plan in sports. And again, this started way before the virus, but of course now there are some interesting shifts of how governments are focusing on sports to bring it back, both from a health point of view and getting their population and their citizen moving and keeping them healthy. Of course, also how to create an industry around it, how to create revenue streams around it, and of course, how to create new athletes which represent the country and everything in between. That's a very exciting space. We have started to be very focused on products and services which are needed by federations, by teams, by venue owners to create a safety or create a safe environment for fans. So whether these are products to screen temperatures, whether it's products to wear for the frontline staff, the same way what you see in a hospital, someone who will be selling tickets, someone who will be the usher, someone who will be selling at the concessionaire, they need to have certain protection and gears on, or customers will not feel very comfortable. So to me, that's it's almost a no-brainer. We've sourced all the products here in Asia. We're working with a lot of factories in China, Malaysia, Thailand, etc. to find this amazing product, and now working with clubs and other rights holders around the world to deliver this. So this is, again, it's just, I guess, being an entrepreneur, seeing there is a need and a demand for it, and how do we fulfill this. So this is a very important part of currently what we're doing. Of course, our traditional sports space, sponsorship, media rights, we're still in it and we'll continue to be in it. Absolutely, you always need to help find revenue streams for rights owners. That will never stop. And of course, that's hard right now. I'm pretty confident that the world will be similar to 2008 and 9, where the marketing dollars, the advertising dollars will be a lot tighter, a lot harder to get to. So you do need a great story. You need to figure out how to bring that money into your sport, and that's for us now, whether it is traditional sport or whether it's esports. I think we have a nice and interesting offering there for folks. And then the last one, and that's really an exciting space for me as well. I've started looking into this about a year ago, and that is to develop a sports fund. I'm working now with a group of people around the world to put together a large fund which allows us to invest in sporting properties. And again, whether that means a club, a team, a league, or exciting sports tech companies, it could be anything in between. The groups I'm working with are more globally focused, but my aim really is to build something here in Asia in the long run, to deploy capital from anywhere in the world to build up the ecosystem. So you might heard me say and or seen on our website where it says that we've generated over $500 million of revenue for rights holder over these 20 years. And that's accurate. It's now, of course, more, but it's just a nice figure to throw out there. And my goal is to generate $1 billion in the next 10. So we're doing 2x in half the time. That's my goal. Now, that doesn't mean it's all just traditional revenue streams of signing sponsorship contracts or whatever. That could well be bringing funding and other forms of new revenue or liquidity to these entities here. So that's where we are. That kind of wraps up, I would say, my first half hour here, talking to you about the fun things I've done. I hopefully had a couple of things in there already, sharing where my learnings, my painful experiences. There is a whole lot more to it, and I'll probably will have another session on that. There is so much more to be learned. I can definitely tell you that I've learned a whole lot more in the last, let's say, 10 or 13 years than I learned in the first 10, when everything was going great and we were just flying. I'm not saying I had more fun in the last 13 years. I probably had more fun in the first 10, but the learning was definitely more when things are not working well, when you are having to adjust and constantly change directions to keep the company alive, to keep the company moving. So I'll leave you with that thought. Hopefully everyone is having getting ready to come back out of COVID-19. I hope you are thinking out of the box. That's the only way. I don't believe we can just go back to normal. There is no normal. There is a new normal, which we keep hearing everywhere. So guys, keep doing this. Keep talking to me. I love having these conversations with you guys. I learn, you learn, hopefully, in these conversations. And I wish you all a great Sunday, and stay safe. Thank you.
The Sports Entrepreneurs by Marcus Luer podcasts are a collection of interviews and stories. All content in this podcast is the copyright of Marcus Luer. Reproduction and distribution of the presentation without written permission of the owner is prohibited. All rights reserved.